Hey, welcome back. As of this recording, it's January 31st, 2026, and it's been a long month. So I wanted to do a couple of specialized presentations based on what's going on in our communities in the world right now, and certainly just a couple of housekeeping items, a couple of prefaces, if you will. Um, Collective trauma is something that's been happening for generations and generations and generations um, to all kinds of populations, but certainly more implicated are communities of color, BIPOC communities, and just want to acknowledge that that has been the case for a very long time. And from my perspective, what I'm seeing is the exacerbation and the escalation of that kind of trauma in all kinds of communities today. So that being said, our current situation, at least from where I'm filming from in the United States, is that we are experiencing a tyrannical regime who is that is abusing its people, and this is hitting folks in a lot of different ways. Whether we're talking about and not to get into specifics because I'm not trying to bring up any unnecessary feelings for folks right now, but things that have happened in Gaza, things that have happened in and around Venezuela, things that have happened in around in Iran, certainly things that have happened all over the United States to immigrant populations and people of color, events in Minneapolis, and on and on. Not to mention the Epstein files, and on and on and on and on and on. So I don't, wherever this hits you, please be mindful and take your time as we go through these presentations. Another housekeeping item, if there's any negative, nasty, or disgusting or rude comments in the comment section, they will be immediately removed and people blocked. So just keep that in mind. I keep a pretty tight ship in general, but it's extra tight this week and next as we talk about collective trauma and community repair. So if you have come here to do that, just know that that is not welcome. What is welcome is an open mind, an open heart, and of course, if you are feeling the effects of collective trauma, whether that is something that has been the case for you for a long time or whether that has come up more recently, you're welcome here for that. So that being said, the topic, with that long-winded intro, but was very necessary, the topic of today's talk is going to be talking about collective trauma and supporting community repair. So this conversation is going to happen as a preface to what we can do with design. So I'm going to have some slides, and then I'm going to talk about some of the ways in which we can create physical environments that support healing. Again, I am not a therapist. I'm not a doctor, a medical doctor of any kind, and this is not medical advice of any sort. This is, in my experience and practice and training, the kinds of things that can be really beneficial. I'll also add in some extras as I kind of channel into it some additional information here. But these slides are a starting point, and then we'll go from there. And this is going to be in two parts, so stay tuned. This is part one. Stay tuned for part two. And again, if you are wondering who is this lady, my name is Katie TT, and I support soul-based sensitive entrepreneurs in creating beautiful, inspiring, uplifting, and healing and transformational physical spaces for themselves and their clients. However, today we are not promoting or pitching any of that. This is simply for community repair. So this is going to go in my, so to that end, this is not going to go under my regular playlist. This is going under my a special tab that I've created for community healing resources. So you can find it there if you're looking to come back to this later. Okay, with all that said, let's dive right in. Thanks for joining, and let's take a look at the slides. Coolio. All right, so when the world hurts, understanding the collective trauma and supporting community repair. Oh, look at me, I froze in the top right-hand corner. Isn't that great? All right, let's get started. I could use a laugh. I take them wherever I can get them, right? All right, so why this conversation matters. Many people are experiencing heightened stress, fear, grief, and uncertainty at the same time, especially now where I think there's already been a lot of generational trauma. And again, especially depending on your background, that is just exacerbated and escalated at this time around the world. I'm happening to be filming from the United States. So I'm speaking from my personal experience and what I'm seeing around me in my communities, etc. These experiences do not stay individual. They can ripple through families, workplaces, communities, and even the global community. So this presentation is shared as education and care is not a paid offering. And again, it's going to go under a different tab in YouTube, so you can find it there. The goal is to understand what collective trauma is, how it shows up, and what actually helps. So I'm sharing this as someone trained in trauma-informed design and nervous system safety, and as a human living inside the same exact world you are, wondering what the hell is going on, or rather knowing what's going on and obviously feeling the impacts of that, just like everyone else. So what is collective trauma? Collective trauma occurs when large groups of people experience harm, threat, or destabilization together. And so it can stem from political violence, systemic oppression, whether that seems more recent or if it's long-term, depending again on your background, climate crises, pandemics, or ongoing social unrest. Unlike individual trauma, it affects shared trust, shared spaces, and shared meaning. So that means with extended collective trauma, especially, it can really shatter groups' trust of systems and overall, which can be incredibly damaging. And it often builds gradually and becomes normalized, which is a shame because effectively what happens when something like that becomes normalized is that people grow to accept the abuses and injustices and decide to just kind of go with the flow, so to speak, which can, obviously create more harm. Whether those groups realize that that's what they're unintentionally doing or not, that's why it's an act of healing to show up, speak up, and never normalize abusive behavior. Not easy, but so important. So how collective trauma can show up? It can show up in your body via chronic tension or fatigue. Chronic tension can show up in a number of different ways. But for so many of us, it could show up as in like, oh, I didn't realize I was like holding my foot. And then all of a sudden, someone pointed it out to me or my shoulders were up, right? That chronic tension can show up through day-to-day life. We don't even realize we're doing it. Fatigue, generalized fatigue, maybe you're getting the right amount of sleep, so to speak, but you still wake up exhausted. Sleep disruption, nervous system overwhelm or shutdown, and nervous system overwhelm or shutdown can also show up in a number of different ways as well. If you're curious about that, I recommend talking to a therapist or trusted health professional. In behavior, it can show up a number of different ways. Here are a few: irritability or emotional numbness, avoidance, difficulty focusing or planning. Yes, feeling distracted, again, feeling fatigue, withdrawal, or increased conflict. Those are some ways in which it can show up as in a behavior for an individual. And the communities, again, this loss of trust, polarization, fractured communication, burnout among caregivers and organizers as well, who are asked to shoulder probably too much of the load, right? So I think it's important to note at this point, this is not a personal failure in any way. These responses are adaptive, not pathological. And so actually, I'm going to pause right here and kind of explain that a little bit more. So we talk about responses are adaptive. Your system is responding in the best way that it knows how to harm and abuse, right? So we say not pathological. All that really is acknowledging that these are normal responses to abuse and a reminder to try to not over pathologize oneself when when you are feeling the abusive systems, etc. Certainly, again, I'm not a therapist and not a doctor, but I was actually I was speaking about this with a colleague of mine the other day who is a psychologist in the field. And we were talking about the importance of not over pathologizing, because that can, depending on how that looks, that can actually cause even more harm. What we want to do is identify what's coming up for an individual, right? And from there, not normalize that harm, call the system to account, while helping individuals heal. So again, I'm not a therapist. I was speaking with someone the other day who is a therapist, and based on my experience, I definitely feel the same way about that for a number of different reasons. But this is why I do what I do. In part, I believe that when we create inclusive spaces, and whether there's a pathology listed for a person or not, and creating spaces that support and facilitate that kind of healing for someone, to not make it about them, being, feeling in any kind of way defective or this, that, and the other, but instead to be inclusive and to call the system of account to account while supporting that healing through space. That's what I'm about. So again, this is not about over pathologizing. This is about not normalizing a harmful system. I hope that's clear. So let me know if you have any questions about that. Again, I'm not a therapist, not a doctor. This is not medical advice, but these are some things that I have noticed over the years. And again, a lot of therapists have mentioned as being problematic as far as the diagnostic system they experience. Nervous systems also respond to threat by design. So again, this is the natural adaptation to harm, especially extended harm. So when many nervous systems are activated at once, the collective field shifts. And that collective field has a collective adaptation. So understanding this reduces shame and increases compassion, right? You think about it, all kinds of people are having similar collective experiences about abuse and harm right now. And understanding that, instead of, overcoming, right, the feeling of isolation and shame, is something that makes us collectively more powerful. So I definitely recommend embracing that. Okay, so here's some things that don't help collective trauma. Minimizing or rushing grief. You may have also, if you are into any kind of new age work, some people refer to this as spiritual bypassing. But if you're talking about this, in a more therapeutic environment, it might be, classifying it differently. So, but again, minimizing or rushing grief. Grief is on its own schedule. And if you've ever experienced really difficult grief before, many people have had this kind of experience where it has its own timeline, and you can't kind of put it in a box. It's very difficult to compartmentalize. And some others, there's a really good quote, and I need to figure out who says this, but grief being the cost of love, right? So when we are grieving maybe the lost perception of a country or an environment, or a set of trust, environments that we used to trust being, kind of cast out or being dramatically changed into something completely different, super harmful for many folks. That grief is the cost of our love for our fellow humans, our communities, right, that are being abused. So this is, again, it's on its own timeline. So it's important for us to be able to not rush through it, and to, again, create environments where they can support and facilitate grieving when necessary. Toxic positivity can be super unhelpful. So that might be someone saying, hey, it's not that bad, and instead, and I know that is a tendency for a lot of folks to kind of make light of a situation that feels really heavy, or difficult, right? But that can sometimes do more harm than good. And since I've often been kind of, interested in being optimistic. I've noticed that my language shifting over the years, and really the silver lining is this, right? Acknowledging the harm, but saying, okay, well, there's a lot of harm, and if you wanted to something, look at something positive today, you can look at this, right? The toxic positivity or forced optimism is not just out of place; it can actually cause more harm. So, demanding productivity over regulation, again, pushing through something when your body and your nervous system is really not up for the task can cause more harm. Overexposure to distressing media can cause harm. I can tell you that I'm aware, based on the footage that I've seen of commentators, journalists, etc., that many of us were having the same experience of watching really traumatic footage over and over and over again. Whether it's information and footage from the streets of Minneapolis, or if it's what you've been viewing as far as events in Gaza and what's been happening to children and families there. Disturbing footage, certainly just disturbing footage years back of George Floyd. Lots of different overexposure to distressing media. I think it's interesting, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but my perspective on why we might be doing this as individuals and collectively is trying to make sense of a really disturbing situation. The shock of seeing those kinds of things and trying to make sense of them, trying to make sense of the evil. Did this really have, initially, and then picking apart, of course, unfortunately, when systems choose to gaslight their people about what they actually saw as well. It's amazing that not only people, both individually and collectively, have to defend what they saw with their own eyes, right? So overexposure does not help. Seeing that over and over again, as tempting as it may be to try to make sense of a situation or push back on harmful lies about what happened. Again, tempting, but not helpful, right? And that creates talk about how we experience our environment, how that can impact us and our nervous systems. That's one of the ways in which we can set some boundaries. So unity also without accountability or safety. So that could mean unintentionally kind of walking into a harmful collective or environment without kind of strategically reviewing like what's going to be best for yourself in the moment, and what's going to be productive. Is an environment actually going to be good for both your nervous system and your goals for how you want to contribute to collective healing? And this is actually, I want to pause here and explain a little bit about this. So sometimes people experience trauma, and as a result of what they've experienced in trauma, they don't always pick the best environments to be in, whether that's like a friend environment, a different type of community environment, etc. And that can actually cause more harm. So there are those of us who are very selective about community and collective healing because we've experienced a double down of trauma and harm within group environments, and have decided we're not available for that. So there's some selective work that goes on there. And you may have heard kind of things along these lines, right? We talk about maybe a troubled teenager who quote unquote falls in with the wrong crowd. Well, that child may have experienced some kind of trauma that pointed them towards some activities that weren't good for them because they hadn't fully healed before choosing a community that they felt aligned with. And so we can fall into, if we're not careful, environments and communities that are unhealthy, unhelpful. And so that looks kind of different, right? As an adult watching this, you may find you know, kind of a similar example, not necessarily collective, but individual, you might find that you've had some bad relationships, and then you've had some trauma from those relationships. And then if there's no like meaningful selectivity and healing in between those, then you might continue to pick bad relationships, just because that's kind of what your framework is that you're working with. You may have had some trauma around friendships and then continue to pick not so great friend groups, because that, again, that trauma is your baseline, and that's not great for you, but it's what your body and your nervous system is used to. So again, you know, that unity without accountability or safety, that can be really, really harmful. And I want to highlight that, because that is the reason that there are so many of us who are really, really careful, selective, and some people who just completely avoid community healing environments in general because they have been unsafe in the past. So if that's you, honor that. Not every, you know, not every type of healing has to be community oriented. And in fact, you may find that most or all of your healing needs to be done solo, and that's okay too. Totally okay. Also not helpful is ignoring the role environments and systems. So here's what does help: a trauma-informed framework. Generally speaking, this framework draws from trauma-informed design, nervous system science, this is a public benefit, not a service or program. I'm not pitching anything, just as a reminder. For today and the next segment on this is just some community awareness. So collective healing happens when environments, relationships, and rhythms support regulation rather than escalation. Okay. Actually, I think I'm going to pause here. And then we're going to talk about, the different steps. And when I say steps, it's just the different concepts required. They don't have to be in any kind of order to be able to engage in collective healing. So we'll pause here for now. And then we're going to jump back into the different concepts for next time, where I'll also talk about how we can support this in our physical environments as well as just collectively in group. So we'll stop there for now. And let's see, is my little face going to come back? No, I guess it just completely froze. Oh, well. All right. Well, we'll stop there, and we'll reconvene for part 2.